Okay, class. So, welcome to the first lecture of our midterms, and this is all about planning and conducting classes. Hey, so when you plan your classes, now we're not going to delve deep into this because, again, this is a topic that is focused on academics, such as myself and my co-faculty members. If you're planning to practice your profession as a medical technologist or continue on um, as a doctor, then you would not be using this as much. Okay, but one way you could use this is to evaluate. You could use this to actually evaluate your professors or your teachers if their lesson plan for the day is fit for the purpose. Okay, so anyways, let's talk about the planning sequence. Okay, first, you have to formulate the objective because at the start of that's also the reason why um, common lectures today commonly introduce the objectives of the lesson first before everything else. Number two, you have to select the content. For example, you limit the content for chapters 1, 2, and 3, and then you organize the content. Because again, sometimes in the textbooks you don't usually have the contents organized logically. So sometimes chapter 2 would be better discussed after chapter 3, and chapter 3 is better discussed after chapter 4, and so on and so forth. So it does not necessarily mean that the reference textbook is always going to have that smooth flow of topics. Next is to choose the teaching methods. Some topics are best taught using a psychoactive skills or psychoactive way. Some lectures are better delivered in a traditional lecture style, and some lectures are best done in activities. Like for example, your PE classes. If we were in a normal PE class, you would be performing the task instead of practically just learning them. You're going to have a brief introduction, and then you're also going to, after that, perform the task itself. As opposed to a subject like PSTM or strategies in teaching, where it would be better, of course, to have the lecture or more on a lecture portion and a few interactive or psychomotor teaching method. Okay. Next is to design assignments to again supplement the lecture. And lastly is to evaluate or to design evaluation methods because we have to be able to know or we have to be able to evaluate if the objectives were met. Hey, starting with the course outline or the learning plan or the syllabus or the course guide, whatever you want to call it, this is a contract between teachers and learners. So basically, at the start of every class or at the start of every semester, you're going to have to hand out your syllabus and explain to your students what the course is all about. What, of course, is the list of course objectives, topics that you're going to tackle, the teaching methods you're going to use if you're going to use lecture styles, practical skills, evaluation, if you're going to use laboratory experiments, and so on and so forth. Also, the syllabus should also contain the methods of evaluation, which means that includes your prelim, midterm, and finals. Also, the quizzes. At the end of the syllabus, you're going to find the references or the textbooks, and of course, at the end also, it's going to be containing the name of your instructor. Okay, so first step in for planning your class is to formulate the objectives. Okay, why do we need to formulate the objectives? Is because we need to guide the selection and handling of course materials. If you don't define the objectives, you're going to be teaching a lot of unnecessary things to the students, which could cause them to information or to get to information overload. Okay. Next, it's going to help determine whether people in the class have learned what the teacher have tried to teach. If you have objectives, you can evaluate if these objectives were met. Okay? Like for example, sabihin natin, gusto ko mag-ipon ng 500 pesos by the end of the week. And then at the end of the week na nakita mo, when you opened your piggy bank, you have 450 pesos. You have this actual metric. Ibig sabihin, you have this measure if you've achieved your goal or not. Now, kapag sinabi mo naman gusto ka lang mag-ipon, you don't have that specific objective. So, ipon ka lang ng ipon, and at the end of the day, you don't really have a way of identifying kung nakapag-ipon ka ba. Kasi relative to your income, magkano ba iniipon mo? Diba? So, you have to have your objectives clearly defined. So, at the end of the meeting, you can evaluate if the learners have learned. Next is that objectives are essential from the learner's perspective. Bakit? Kasi guys, 'di ba, I'm sure all of you want to know why you need to learn a certain class. 'Di ba? Lagi yung tanong yan eh. Saan ko ba gagamitin to in the future? Ano bang gagawin ko dito sa information na matututunan ko dito? And that is why objectives are very important. Okay? Because you have to know why you're going to use or why you need to learn these topics. Okay, so characteristics of objectives, tandaan lang po natin yung keyword SMART or yung acronym na SMART. It should be specific. Like I mentioned earlier, it should contain what is expected, why it is important, who is involved, where is it going to happen, and which attributes are important. So lahat ng details kailangan kasama. Dapat din po it's measurable. Emphasizes the need for concrete standard criteria for measuring progress toward the attainment of the goal. Sabi natin kanina, we have to be able to measure if the objectives were met. That is why it's very important to have a specific set of objectives. Next, attainable. It has to be able to point out goals that are realistic. Hindi naman tayo pwedeng magbigay ng objectives na guys, sabihin natin, objective natin ngayong class na to matapos yung buong libro. Diba? Hindi nyo naman kaya in 1 hour. So, it has to be attainable. Next, result-oriented and relevant. It stresses the importance of choosing goals that matter. Relevant goals are purpose-driven. Meaning, kailangan nating matutunan to, kaya natin inaaral. Hindi natin inaaral kasi nakalagay sa syllabus. Okay? So, by the way guys, your curriculum and your syllabus is carefully planned by your professors, the deans, and of course, the program heads. Lahat po ng faculty members ay nagtutulong-tulong para mag-formulate ng syllabus na yan. So these are topics that are important to your course. Next, time-bound and terminal. It emphasizes the importance of formulating goals within a time frame, giving them a target date. Alam naman po natin, guys and dear students, that we all love to procrastinate. Mahilig tayo, bukas na lang, may oras pa naman eh. So if we're not time-bound and terminal, ibig sabihin wala tayong target date, wala tayong due date, hindi pa natin gagawin yan. Diba? Because again, that's the nature of human beings. Na medyo tamad kasi tayo. But again, don't take that against yourself because that is how humans work. Okay, so importance of SMART objectives. It's quite easy to find out at the end of the lesson if the teacher attained his or her objective or not. So kapag SMART daw po yung objectives natin, you can easily determine if the objectives were met. Next, it's easier to the teacher's part to formulate a test that is valid to measure the attainment of the lesson objective. Kasi guys, sometimes, di ba po, ito common experience din sa college eh. Inaral nyo ng inaral, tapos pagdating ng exam, wala dun yung inaral nyo. Yes, that is because the teacher did not, or the teacher's part, the teacher had a hard time formulating a test that is valid to the topic. Okay, so naliligaw-ligaw yung test niya. Iba yung in-stress niya sa lecture niya, tapos pagdating dun sa test or sa quiz, iba na. Kasi, again, it's not a clearly defined objective. Next, the lesson becomes more focused for the teacher. If you have a concrete picture of the behavior that the students should be able to demonstrate if the teacher realizes his or her lesson objective. This is particularly important with skill-based courses. Okay? Kasi sometimes, if you have a skill-based course or skill-based topic, makikita mo dun sa students yung improvement nila when they perform that skill. This is very common, and a very concrete example of this one is sa phlebotomy. Habang tayo ay nagsisimula pa lang ng phlebotomy, first time nating tutusok, nanginginig-nginig pa yan. Okay? Because again, may takot pa tayo na baka makasakit, baka mali yung ginagawa, you're inflicting pain on another person, so baka mali yung ginagawa mo. But then, after teaching properly, pagkatapos natin siyang ma-instruct, pagkatapos natin siyang mabigyan ng maayos na instruction, makikita na natin na yung nawawala na yung nginig niya, yung confidence niya sa phlebotomy tumataas, and also yung skill niya and general conduct niya while performing the task is a lot better. Next, increase the teacher's accountability for the learning of the students. Now, if you know the objectives of the teacher, alam mo kung nagagawa ba ng teacher or ng professor mo yung trabaho niya. Okay? Because if you have a clearly defined objective, then pwede mong sabihin, ma'am, sir, hindi naman natin na-reach yung objective. Okay? So, may accountability ngayon si teacher. Next, it departs from the unsound practice of teaching that is so spread out that in the end, the teacher finds himself unclear on what test he is going to give to assess the learning. So, ito rin yung example natin kanina dito sa number 2 example. Nahihirapan si teacher magbigay ng actual assessment tool kasi yung objectives niya ay hindi niya din maintindihan. Okay? So, that is the importance of SMART objectives. Next, taxonomy of objectives. Ginagamit po or dinevelop po ito ni Benjamin Bloom. So this was recently called the Bloom's taxonomy. And this is actually a very prevalent taxonomy system that is used in our syllabus. So kung mapapansin nyo, these verbs are used in our learning objectives and also in the syllabus. Okay, so the 3 domains, let's start discussing with the cognitive domain. So these are objectives that deal with recall or recognition of knowledge and the development of intellectual abilities and skills. So basically, this is your brain processing. Okay? So Bloom's taxonomy is actually a hierarchy. Sabihin, there is a level that is higher, level that is lower. So, meron tayong levels, no? And the lowest level would be knowledge. So, ito yung most common type ng exam na makukuha natin since multiple choice tayo, knowledge type exams, meaning that you know, alam mo. For example, 1 plus 1, you know that it's 2. And then, next you have comprehension, which means that you understand why that's the reason. So, bakit ba naging 2 ang 1 plus 1? Because mathematically, if you add 1 and 1, you get 2. So you understand the concept, you understand the principle. Next is application. So now you can add for example, 1 apple plus 1 apple is 2 apples. So ako nagugutom ako, so I'm going to get 2 apples. Okay? Because 2 is higher than 1. Next is analysis. It's a bit more complex, but this time it's going to be 1 plus 1 plus another few strings of numbers. No? Next is synthesis, meaning creating theory, and finally evaluation. Okay? So mostly there are courses that focus on these lower portions. Like for example, PSTM as an introductory course. Hindi naman siya major, so we're going to focus more on knowledge and comprehension. However, dun sa mga majors natin, like for example, si PAP or MTAP, sa case nyo, you're going to focus more on evaluation. Okay? Research is synthesis, or your thesis is synthesis, and then your laboratory major subjects would focus more on analysis and application. So tandaan nyo yan guys, different levels of courses as you progress in the medical technology course, tumataas yung taxonomy natin or yung hierarchy natin. Okay, so again, these are just elaborations of the previous example. Okay, so these are the verbs that we use in formulating the objectives. The knowledge, again, since ang kailangan lang naman natin is to recall, to describe, so you have define, delineate, describe, identify, list, name, and state. So these are all verbs that indicate knowledge. So kapag kaya mong ilista, kapag kaya mong i-enumerate, you know, alam mo. But you don't necessarily comprehend. Kasi kapag sinabi natin comprehension, you are able to classify, discuss, estimate, explain, rephrase, and summarize. Meaning that these topics are things that you understand, that you comprehend, as opposed to just knowing. Okay? For example, you know that the sun is a star. So comprehending is knowing why the sun is a star. Okay? Next is application. So application is applying the knowledge you know, applying the comprehension you know, and thus yung mga verbs na ginagamit natin is adjust, apply, compute, demonstrate, generate, and prove. When it comes to analysis, you have your analyze, compare, contrast, critic, defend, and differentiate. So these are, again, verbs that indicate or that assume analysis. And then synthesis, create, develop, propose, suggest, write, and evaluation, assess, choose, conclude, defend, evaluate, and judge. So kung mapapansin nyo guys, itong mga topics na ito, or itong mga verbs na to, these are things that you're going to be performing. Isipin nyo lang, when you are in your major laboratory subjects. Okay, like for example, ngayon kasi, yung subjects na inaaral natin, Filipino, General Education subjects, PSTM, nandito tayo sa knowledge and comprehension. So meaning that we're just trying to do these things. Ito lang yung mga bagay na pinapagawa namin sa iyo. And then you have also, kapag nandun na kayo sa major laboratory subjects nyo, nandito na tayo sa application and analysis. Because we're applying the skills and we're analyzing problems. Kapag naman nandun na tayo sa medyo higher, pag-graduate na kayo, nandito na tayo sa synthesis and evaluation. So nandiyan na yung thesis, nandito na rin yung mga test or mga exams natin, so you could test yourself. So next is a parallel to Bloom's taxonomy. You have Anderson's taxonomy. You have creating, evaluating, analyzing, applying, understanding, and remembering. So in concept, pareho lang sila ng sinasabi. Okay, so again, elaborations. These are, again, very, very similar to Bloom's taxonomy. So, hindi na natin siya i-discuss. So that is for your cognitive domain. Next is your psychomotor skills domain. You have your objectives that deal with physical and kinesthetic skills. So you're going to observe this mostly in your physical education subjects. Okay, so these are the verbs that we use: arrange, assemble, calibrate, combine, copy, create, etc., etc. Okay, so these are things that you have to actually do and perform using your body. Next is the affective domain. So those that deal with the development of attributes like genuine interest, desirable attitudes, values, and commitment as expected learning outcomes. So this is more on the personality, the behavior part of our learning. So verbs that we use is accept, agree, choose, comply, commit, etc., etc. Again, these reflect personality, behavior of the person, and so on and so forth, as opposed to knowledge and skills. So knowledge, skills, and feelings. No? Next, wording of objectives. Objective is incomplete unless it contains the intended learner. So sino ba yung dapat niyang ma-reach? The behavior to be performed. Ano ba yung dapat gawin ni learner? The conditions to which it is to be performed. Ibig sabihin ba, kailangan ba time pressured siya? Kailangan ba mabilis? Kailangan ba clear? Kailangan ba extended yung explanation? And the expected degree of attainment of specific standards. Okay? Is it comprehensive? Is it basic? May mga ganun tayong objectives. So, kailangan lahat yan kasama to be able to properly word an objective. So, very complex. Actually, not that complex. No? Kailangan lang, you know who that objective is directed to. You know how it should be performed, at under what conditions should it be performed, and ano yung degree or expected degree of attainment, or gaano ka-advanced na ba yung attainment ng standards natin. So after the objectives, you have to select content. The general guidelines for course content are usually prescribed by the curriculum of the school or institution for which the educator works. Okay, so again, this is defined by the administration. Next is you have to know how much time you can devote to the topic, the kind of background the students have, and if a textbook has already been selected for the course, its depth of content can give you some hints as to what you need to include. Now, very important is the time that you have to devote to the topic. Kasi like, for example, itong topic na to, how to properly structure a class. How much time am I going to devote to this topic knowing that in the end, hindi nyo siya masyadong magagamit? Or if a handful of you is going to use this kind of um, topic, but majority of you is not. So, gano'ng kadami nating oras ang ilalaan natin para dito? Next is the background you students have. Uh, Kailangan nating i-consider yung population natin. Like for example, kayo, if you have a background in teaching, then I would be giving you a more advanced course. Okay, so that is the reason why we apply Bloom's taxonomy. Kasi kapag wala pa kayong background or wala pang background yung students, we start with knowledge. Because we want to develop the background. Gusto namin ma-develop yung mga alam nyo na bagay before we move on to higher hierarchies. Like for example, analysis. Okay? Hindi naman pwedeng analysis na kayo agad nang wala pa kayong prior knowledge. Okay, so you have to consider the background of the students. Kung medyo madami na silang alam tungkol sa topic na yon, pwede ka na mag-move on dun sa next topic. Next, organizing content. You have to make sure that the content is organized, and it can make all the difference between sessions that are enjoyable and smooth running and those in which students are irritated and grumbling. Mapapansin nyo may mga contents tayo that you particularly enjoy, and may mga content tayo na hindi natin na-enjoy. So these are things that, for example, lectures, discussions, role-playing, may mga topics na appropriate para dyan. Okay? For example, sabihin natin, basketball. If I was teaching basketball, would you be excited? Would you be jubilant if I was just teaching the concept of basketball? Wala tayong practical application. Definitely not. Diba? So, there are things or there are topics that require a certain type of teaching. So, para mas ma-enjoy at mas matuto yung student. Okay, again, choosing a teaching method, factors that affect the choice of method is the selection of method depending on the objectives and type of learning you are trying to achieve. Because if you're trying to achieve an analysis type of, or kapag ang objective natin is analysis level na, then you would not be teaching at the level of knowledge lang. Hindi ka magle-lecture lang. You're going to try and give them a case study, a research paper, something to critique, and so on and so forth. Okay? Next, course content also dictates methodology to some extent. And compatibility between teachers and teaching methods, compatibility between learners and teaching methods are important. Meron tayong mga teachers talaga na hindi masyadong compatible sa type ng teaching method na yon. Kung mapapansin nyo, may mga teachers na medyo seryoso, tapos pag nag-joke sila, hindi nyo alam na nag-joke sila. Kasi nga, they are not very much compatible with the numerous kind of teaching. Okay? Learners should also be compatible with the teaching method. May mga learners na gusto auditory, so baka mamaya mas gusto nila na nagda-lecture ka instead of pinapagawa mo sila. So that's very important. You have to consider the compatibility of the teacher and the student. Next, availability of resources also determine which strategies are to be used. Next is designing assignments. So I'm sure at this point you're very much familiar with the different types of assignment naman. But it depends on how you want to assess the students. So like for example, you want to see them think analytically, then assign a short essay. If you want the students' ability to use resources to answer specific questions, then let them investigate the answers and have them write up the answers. Okay, so these different assignments have different objectives, and again, it would be based on your objective. So mga assignments, hindi lang dapat pinapagawa because kailangan ng grade ni teacher. Mga assignments dapat pinapagawa because you want to achieve a certain objective. Okay, next is choosing a textbook. So you have to provide a stable and uniform source of information for students to use in their individual study. So you have to consider the quality of writing, how the book was organized, kung may graphics ba yan. Evaluate the content scope and quality, credibility of authorship, format, quality of print, and the like. So that's the reason why mapapansin nyo sa mga textbooks nyo, kadalasan ang mga authors may mga credentials like MD, RMT, MSMT, may mga ganyan. But if you check the fine print, may mga contributing authors then that are just RMTs. Okay, so those things. No? Examine some chapters, kung pasok ba siya sa standard mo. Examine the book's appearance, if it fits the crowd, kung maganda ba siya, if it's modern, or if it's dated, and then the way in which the book will be used, and the cost of the textbook. Next is conducting the class. So the first class session determines the tone for the whole course. So kapag una pa lang masungit ka na, malamang sa malamang, your students are going to think of you as someone na masungit. Okay, so begin by introducing yourself the way you want your students to see you. So kung gusto mo na medyo lively yung pagkakakilala sa ng students, then introduce yourself in a livelier manner. Next, welcome the class, read names. Early and late hour, a little humor is helpful on the first day, so makipagbiroan. You have to build rapport with your students. Next is you have to communicate the expectations. So at the end of the course, ano ba yung ina-expect nating matutunan ng mga students? You have to cover the rules na gusto mong sundin ng mga students, and you have to communicate enthusiasm for the subject. So dapat syempre maramdaman ng students na gusto mo yung subject na tinuturo mo. Kasi baka mamaya ikaw nagtuturo ka ng, for example, biostatistics and epidemiology, tapos ipaparamdam mo sa students mo na ayaw mo ng subject. So, again, red flag, your students are not going to learn from you kasi nga nakikita nila na ikaw mismo na nagtuturo ng subject ay ayaw yon. Okay? And also, you have to give the significance and personal application of the subject to the students. Again, sige. For example, sa PSTM class natin, the application of these concepts or topics na din-discuss natin ngayon is maybe in the future, gusto nyo magturo like myself or your other idol na faculty member, or maybe you can use this kapag nakikipag-communicate na kayo sa mga patients, because when you are explaining to your patients, that is also considered to be teaching. Next, subsequent classes naman, begin by gaining and controlling the attention of the learner. So dapat nakukuha mo yung attention nila and controlling their attention. Next, establish the impression of control. And next, close proximity may help establish presence and authority. So medyo dikit-dikit tayo. Alam naman natin ngayon, physical distancing. So for now, layo muna. Next, assess the learners. Dapat may pre-test, short questionnaires, or asking questions in the class are also appreciated. Kapag tinatanong kayo ng mga profs nyo, feel free to answer. When they ask, ito secret of the industry. Kaming mga professors, um, kaming mga teachers, mga nasa academe, when we ask questions, we don't really expect too much of a right answer. We just want to hear your voice. We just want to know that you're there, that you're listening. So, we're not necessarily looking for a correct answer. So, kapag mali yung answer nyo, no problem, because that's how the classroom is supposed to be. Kapag mali yung question natin, itama natin. Okay? Learning is best done when you learn from your mistakes. Next, follow the planning sequences and continue to refine approach to teaching. So, dahan-dahan nating i-improve yung teaching methods natin. And lastly, of course, the process is hard work, but the outcome is well worth the effort. Okay, so one of the reasons why we are in teaching is because we want to help develop students, we want to help develop the future of the profession. So although mahirap yung work, in the end, we see it as something that is well worth the effort. Okay, so again, I've been talking a bit fast because it's a long discussion. So hopefully, if you think na medyo mabilis ako magsalita, just slow down the video. YouTube has that option. And if not naman, medyo nababagalan pa kayo, why not speed it up? Okay, so that ends our first lesson for the midterms. Hopefully, you learned something new, or rather, you learned siguro a bit more on how to evaluate your outcomes or your objectives, no? And your teachers as well. So, sana makatulong in your way, in your own way, itong lecture na to. Okay, so that's it. Goodbye, and thank you for listening.